Tim said, please let people know if you want to ask a question. Write it on the note card, and there'll be a couple young people around to select that, okay? So, Mom and Dylan, here we go.
What a lovely introduction. First of all, the venue here is amazing. What a place to talk about the environment on the banks of the beautiful Fox River here in McHenry. I grew up in Aurora, and so I have a connection with this river. In fact, the first TV station I looked at was on Stolp Avenue in downtown Aurora. And we looked out on the Fox River all the time, the mighty Fox. So it's a pleasure to be here. And you know, Don Wibbles, it's interesting. Nancy, I'll never forget your call. We had such a lovely conversation. And I thought, gosh, who can I tell her who might be a wonderful speaker? Don Wibbles is a Nobel Prize winning climate researcher. And it's interesting you brought him up, Nancy, because the University of Illinois honored him. He is retired, although Don will never retire. But he's no longer officially a professor down at the University of Illinois. He spent the last 2 years in the Obama White House as a climate advisor. He's been the lead author of the seminal UN IPCC reports on climate change. He's headed up the National Climate Assessment, which was Congress's they wanted an assessment of where we were with climate science and what we knew about the climate change that was ongoing. Don has done this. They honored him down in Champaign at a dinner this past week, and I was down there. You know, among his accomplishments, he was the guy who connected the chlorofluorocarbon propellants that we used in aerosol cans with the destruction of the stratospheric ozone layer. In fact, they were showing he had a group of speakers there, and one of them, a group of them were his PhD students. He's been advisor for many of them, and they showed a series of papers, and here's a young Don Wibbles with his paper on how they established from Antarctic observations the fact the ozone hole was widening and that it was chlorofluorocarbon propellants. And this led to passage of the Montreal Protocol, which was an international ban on the use of CFCs. It also changed Freon that was used in air conditioners that had the same effect on the ozone layer to another chemical. And it was interesting, he not only identified CFCs as the culprit, but he came up with alternative gases that could be used that weren't as harmful to the environment. So he's an amazing scientist and a longtime friend. I met him at a field museum conference on climate change. They brought media types in to hear climate researchers talk about this. And he said to me, if you ever want to do anything on climate change, I'd be happy to work with you. So we've worked over the years. We've been to almost every congressional rep in this area, done public forums and all, in the attempt to get the word out on climate change. Because climate change is real, it's happening, and we're paying for it right now as taxpayers in this country, whether or not some people choose to believe that or not. Is warmer today. The mean temperature is the warmest in at least 1,000 years. And the rate at which it's warming exceeds anything that we've ever seen before in the term of human existence on this planet. I'll talk some more about how we know about past climates, because the fact is, even though the instrument record only goes back 150 years, there's a science known as paleoclimatology that has established what the climate on this planet has done back millions of years. And I'll explain that a little bit later, but just think of what we've seen in the way of climate change in the last year. I mean, 2021 was the 6th hottest year on record. The years from 2014 to 2021 were the 8th warmest. We've seen 1,000-year floods in Germany and Belgium and China. We've had the hottest temperature ever recorded in Canada, 121 degrees in British Columbia, of all places. The hottest temperature ever recorded in Portland, Oregon, 117 degrees. Death Valley went up to 130. We have rapidly intensifying hurricanes directly as a result of the oceans, which, by the way, were the warmest globally in the recorded record last year. And it goes on and on. Hurricane Ida went into Louisiana with 150-mile-an-hour winds. which its remnants went up into New York City, produced catastrophic flooding up there. This is no accident. Out in the Southwest, they've had the driest 22-year period in 1,200 years. The Gulf Stream on the East Coast is at its slowest rate in 1,000 years. And the reason it is because the ice is melting in Greenland, sending meltwater out into the North Atlantic, and this has disrupted that warm current. So what's happening is, because the Gulf Stream is slowed down, water is piling up on the East Coast, and sea level rise has increased in speed. It also is warming. Warm water is collected. The fastest warming body of water on the planet is the Gulf of Maine. And this has vast implications for the lobster and fishing industry out there, among other things. So it's really interesting. It's estimated we may lose $1 trillion of coastal Florida real estate by the end of this century if we don't do something about the sea level rise that's going on right now. I wanted to show you just a couple things before I begin my talk. NASA, as anybody who's followed science knows, does an amazing job of illustrating science. Look at this. This is an animation here of global temperatures started by latitude. You can see the planet on the left side of the screen, and those little moving markers right there are how much above or below normal the temperatures are. We start at 1800 and they animate right up to the present time. The highest latitudes are warming the fastest, which by the way our computer models had accurately predicted for decades. But watch how the top couple of lines there are indicating higher latitudes, the Arctic latitudes. Shoot over to the right, the farthest, as we go through time, and watch what happens in these final decades. How much faster the warming is going. It's accelerating the rate of warming that is happening on the planet. There it is, right there. So we are warming dramatically as a planet. I'm going to show you another animation. This is another way of looking at planetary warming, also from NASA. We'll start at 1880, because that's when the instrument record begins. What we're looking at is the number of degrees above normal every month is in those circles. And you'll see as time goes on how the circles expand. That's because the outer ring there is the greatest number of degrees above normal. And you'll see how we start getting the orange and red circles to show up later in this animation. That's in the most recent decades. But that's our planet warming right there. And it's really quite dramatic. A lot follows from a warming planet. You know, you hear we warmed up 1 degree or 2 Celsius, and you think, gosh, that doesn't sound like much. And you hear that sea level is rising by a couple of millimeters a year. The fact is it doesn't rise evenly. And even when you bring storms into a rising sea level situation, this permeates the groundwater and ruins the water supplies. But look how we've warmed up right there. I want to show you another graphic here quickly. Oh, and this is kind of interesting. We tilt it down. The bottom is back in 1880. The top line is 2021, last year. So you can see how we're warming up progressively. Anybody who tells you otherwise is uninformed, because that's what's going on. Here's another interesting thing. The permafrost is melting in the northern end. I go up to Alaska frequently. Let's see if we can run this. What's being ignited there are bubbles of methane that have been trapped in the permafrost, and as it melts, they're being released. We may not get the animation to work. Don't worry about it, Destiny. But you can see what's going on. These are researchers from the University of Alaska. And these bubbles are being released as the permafrost melts, but also organic activity. Decay is beginning again, so methane is being produced. Methane is a more potent greenhouse gas. It holds on to and radiates more heat than carbon dioxide does. It's 25 to 30 times more effective at collecting and re-radiating heat than carbon dioxide. It doesn't last as long. It lasts several decades. Carbon dioxide's around over 1,000 years once produced. So what happens is these bubbles come up. You can actually see them bubbling out of the streams in the Arctic, and you can find them. Methane's extremely flammable. It also is a gas that's released when we frack, when we break the surface of the mantle and get the gas from underneath the ground. Let's go to the next graphic. This is a plot from an Alaska climatologist who does great work, Dr. Brian Brettschneider. We'll have it up here. just a second, but this is a look at how winter temperatures have changed across the continent. There it is. And what you see here is the fastest warming is in the brightest red and brown areas up north. Those are areas that have warmed between 5 and 7 degrees. But the whole country in the last 75 years, the December, January, February period is warm. You look at us in Chicago, remember when it went down to 20 below zero regularly in the 1970s? We don't do that anymore. It gets cold, it's unpleasant, but our winters are not what they used to be. The next map is Alaska. Now here you're up in the Arctic. That white area is where the temperature has increased on winters more than 8 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a stunning increase and a very rapid one then. And then precipitation change as well. The green areas are where it's gotten wetter in winter. The yellow areas are where it's gotten drier. Reducing the amount of moisture. So there, just a couple of graphics. Oh, and one last one. And this is the global temperature. You see it before. Starting back in 1880 and going up to the present. And we're in new territory in terms of warming around the planet. All right, on to the talk, and I'll show you a couple more graphics later on. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation to speak. This is an honor. And thank you to the environmental defenders of McHenry County for organizing this session and just for what you do. I've been a broadcast meteorologist for more than half a century. And my view of climate change has undergone a sea change over that time. I mention that because if you have questions about the veracity of climate science, you have in me a fellow traveler. If you talked to me even 40 years ago, I'd have raised doubts about the veracity of conclusions by climate scientists and of the science itself. The Arctic warming faster than the rest of the planet, the melting of ice there, how is that even possible, I asked at the time. I thought, you're going to have to prove that's actually happening to me. Well, it's happened. I've seen the atmosphere do things that I wouldn't have believed possible back in the early years of my career. And one involves the rate of ice melt and warming in the Arctic. The Arctic has warmed dramatically. Rather than warming at 2 times the rate of the rest of the planet, new data suggests the actual rate of change in the Arctic is on the order of 3 times as fast. The Arctic is one of the canaries in the coal mine in terms of climate change. What happens in the Arctic has global implications. Now, given the certainty I hear in dismissals of climate change concerns in some quarters and from some media sources, I always suggest that folks hearing this look into the backgrounds of those who are making the claim that climate change is a bunch of malarkey. Do they have atmospheric science training? Have they worked in any capacity in the fields of meteorology or climatology? Climate change has always occurred, but what's happening today is vastly different than the ice ages and climate change of the past. Past climate shifts, with the exception of those brought on by asteroid hits, such as the one that wiped out the dinosaurs when an asteroid hit near the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico 66 million years ago, sending a vast tidal wave across the country as far north as the Dakotas, occurred over tens of thousands of years. This allowed more time for adaptation. The climate shifts occurred on geologic timescales then, and involved shifts in the shape of Earth's orbit about the sun, which took the Earth farther from the sun at certain periods of the year. Superimposed on that were wobbles in our planet's wobble in its axis. And when you did that, both of them together, you cut into the strength of sunlight reaching the Earth, and you set up a major ice age. Together, these are referred to as Milankovitch cycles. Read about that. I have people who write and say, well, you know, what, did the dinosaurs start fluctuating? Is that why the, it shows a total understanding of how what's driving climate change today is radically different than what brought on the ice ages. It's clear to me people don't read a book on the subject before they draw their conclusions. Now, what's different about today's climate change it isn't the product of astronomical changes in our orbit about the sun or Earth's wobble on its axis, all of which happened over tens of thousands of years. Today's climate change is occurring fast, over 1 or 2 generations rather than tens of thousands of years. And today's climate change is being driven by a wholesale change in the gases in our atmosphere, which are produced through fossil fuel use. These gases hold on to and re-radiate heat. All weather on Earth is driven by the fact that one area heats up more than another. Meteorologists call this differential heating. Differential heating drives jet streams, their location and strength, and the movement of the weather systems which deliver the planet's precipitation. Add another key variable to today's climate change, and that's the sheer number of people on this planet. A population unlike any in the history of Earth. 7.9 billion souls reside on our planet, with food and water supplies dependent on a stable climate. The stable climate is growing far less stable. It's given to more frequent extremes, not what you want in sustaining food and water supplies over the short term and the long term. Plus, climate change is profoundly changing our oceans, their temperature and their acidity, and also a major source of food on the planet. Time was when you took on an entire science, and those who have devoted careers to its study and attempted to characterize it as fiction, as some are today, which is happening in many quarters on social media and media outlets, you had to provide facts behind your criticism of the science. That doesn't seem true in the social media age we're now in. If you have a keyboard, a gut feeling, a social media platform, and if you follow someone who dismisses science with what sounds like certainty, even if they possess no working knowledge in science, then the modern view is it's fair game to express your own misgivings, and you do it to a sizable segment of society through a social media platform or a media outlet. Climate change is particularly easy to misrepresent because its impacts are nonlinear. In other words, their occurrence doesn't occur in view of a particular population every single day, nor do these climate impacts affect all areas simultaneously or equally. Instead, they hit extreme weather and climate events, whether in the form of heat waves, rapidly intensifying hurricanes, bursts of extreme rainfall and flooding, or crippling droughts. The periods between these events and the fact that not everybody sees them instantly as they're occurring gives critics the chance to claim climate change as being overblown and isn't nearly as impactful as it truly is. Let's look at some of the ways climate change is misrepresented to intentionally raise doubts about what's really happening. The reason it's important to take this misinformation on is because it leads to bad public policy. An informed, educated public, such as the folks in this room who are sacrificing a chunk of your invaluable weekend to learn about climate change, is essential in order to take climate change on effectively. So let's examine some of the misrepresentations of climate change that we've all heard presented to us. A favorite of the climate denier community is the claim that these are natural cycles at play, that what we see happening is business as usual as always happened. Yet any expressions of concern are chicken little, the sky is falling type responses. The first response to that claim is that it's merely natural climate cycles doing their thing, should they? Tell us more about these cycles. Identify them for us. What are they called? How often do they occur? Who has produced solid evidence these cycles exist? Much less that they're actually at work and what's going on right now. When you do this, you find there are no solid answers provided because, in the words of one of my climate professors years ago, the claim of cycles driving weather and climate, other than cycles on timescales of tens of thousands of years, has been investigated backwards, forwards, and upside down over the years, and has come up empty. The Great Lakes have seen water levels rise and fall over the years. There's a form of cyclicality to these rises and falls, but not in a regular enough manner to allow accurate forecasting of them. The same is true of solar cycles, changes in the output of the sun known to occur every 11 years or so. It was once thought that these impacted or precipitated droughts and low temperature patterns. To the extent that was ever true, it sure isn't happening now. The buildup of greenhouse gases and the retention of heat they have been produced is so robust today that they've all but negated the impact of solar cycles. And here's something else to consider. The change in the output of the sun with these cycles is perceived as larger than what really occurs. If solar cycles really had an impact, then temperatures would have cooled in recent years and decades in line with the observed decrease that we know has occurred in solar output. Instead, we've recorded 7 of Earth's warmest years globally since 2015. All this in a period in which the sun was in a comparatively quiet phase, a quiet phase from which it's finally emerging. It's a sign that human greenhouse gas production has defeated shifts in climate and weather cycles driven by a genuine cycle that occurs on the sun. Then there are the claims that an ice age was predicted and that scientists have changed their mind about overall planetary warming. I love this one. Contrary to the handful of news magazine articles which suggested in the 1970s that cooling which did occur from the 40s through the 70s might lead to an ice age or at best a reduction in food production, scientists have actually known since before the Civil War, which began in 1861, that our planet was likely to warm, and have said so. The notion of an impending ice age put forward in these relatively few news articles in the 1970s, the claim that cooling was imminent, was an outlier, way out of line with thinking and scientific papers issued by the majority of climate scientists in the 1970s. The notion that ice age was coming was fringe thinking. It was a message put forward by a small number of scientists on the fringes of scientific thought on climate change. This ice age notion has been repeated time and again by climate deniers, apparently to suggest to the public that climate scientists have changed their minds on the overall planetary warming, and this to undermine the confidence in scientific forecasts of continued planetary warming. Scientists haven't changed their minds at all. It's been well known since the 1800s that the production of greenhouse gases through the burning of fossil fuels was likely to produce warming. And the message from the climate science community has been consistent and unchanged. Warming was and is the course that we're on. Here's another myth that arises every time there's a snowstorm or a cold wave, like the one which hit Texas for 3 weeks a year ago in February and received much coverage. That cold wave officially killed 217, but it likely killed more than 700, and the real death toll may actually have been over 1,000 or more. Every time there's a cold spell, we hear, so what's happened to global warming? Global warming, which is in fact ongoing, is actually alive and well, despite what amounts to very occasional instances of cold blasts. Asking what's happened to global warming shows an intrinsic misunderstanding of the difference between weather, which involves short-term shifts in temperatures and precipitation, and climate, which covers long-term shifts in temperature and precipitation over decades and centuries. A single cold wave or snowstorm isn't climate. Persistent and recurring weather trends are, and the warming underway on the Earth is well established. One other thing misrepresented in the Texas cold spell as a sidebar was the claim that renewable forms of energy were responsible for the grid failures. That the failure of the electrical grid was the result of increasing use of renewables, and that renewables, the use of solar and wind power, was behind the deadly failure in the electrical grid there. That simply wasn't the case. It was yet another shot at renewables as a source for energy. Make no mistake, renewable energy is our future. It holds the promise of jobs, will free us from dependence on unreliable sources of energy and political bad players. Where Europe further along in the use of renewable energy, and in fairness to Europe has actually been very active in the development of renewable energy. The current concerns over Russia providing fossil fuels to Europe would be removed. And so would gas price fluctuations, which arise every time there's a jolt to the production system, be it political or natural, such as a war or a hurricane off the Gulf Coast, where we have so many of our oil rigs. The use of renewable energy sources for energy production is a critical component in slowing the human-induced climate change currently and demonstrably underway. Several frozen wind turbines were cited as the cause of power grid failures last year in Texas. The fact is that 90% of the energy grid interruption there, which proved so deadly in that cold wave, was the product of fossil fuel troubles. In particular, natural gas production failures. Malfunctions in the natural gas lines were to blame for 90% of the energy loss in Texas because of the poor maintenance of natural gas lines. The claim renewables were at fault was bogus. The fact is, wind turbines operate just fine in much colder environments like Antarctica and Alaska. It wasn't renewables at fault, it was conventional fossil fuel sources for energy. Another incorrect notion in discussions of climate change is the claim that it isn't supposed to snow on a warming planet. Let's correct that misconception, thrust upon us by those who question climate science. Cold spells, even some record cold spells, can and do occur on a warming planet, just less frequently and over less area. So too does snow, and sometimes big snows. Snows, when and where they occur, can actually be heavier than earlier snows because the surrounding atmosphere is warming and able to hold more water. Every degree Fahrenheit that Earth warms, its atmosphere is able to hold 4% more water. That's a big deal. It fuels winter snowstorms, but it's also one prime reason a number of hurricanes, like Hurricane Harvey that hit Houston and Galveston in 2017, in Texas, and Hurricane Florence in 2018 in the Carolinas, are wetter than any that have occurred on record landfalling in the United States. It's also the reason we've seen a 57% increase in the number of heavy rains which have occurred in the Midwest. Now, as a sidebar, we're in drought here right now. We have a La Nina going. Climate is a product of a lot of factors, and La Nina summers can be dry. The summer of 1988 is a great example. They aren't always dry, but they can be. So we may be in some water trouble for the summer, and we certainly, as you know, big snows time and again, are in a state of drought. Now, it's not that cold outbreaks don't occur, but instead that they occur over less area and less terrain and with decreasing frequency, which is precisely what's been happening. Think of the regular sub-zero cold waves, some with temperatures under 20 below that we've experienced in this area in the 1970s. We still have cold spells, but far less frequently. Winters here have warmed by nearly 3 degrees overall since the 1970s, a tremendous increase for a season.
Oh, yeah.
Now, on a global basis, the planet's mean temperature is warming, thus the term often misinterpreted global warming. The thing to realize about the term global warming is that warmth and cold aren't evenly distributed. They never have been. While the vast majority of areas have warmed over our planet, there are still areas of cold, just less of them. So if you're in a cool area, you may be unaware that much of the rest of the planet is warming. The warm areas cover more real estate than cold areas in this globally warming regime. And underscoring the point is the fact that record high temperatures outnumber record cold temperatures for many decades by a margin of 2 to 1. Now, we've all heard climate change concerns dismissed with statements like, Earth's climate has always changed and humans have always managed to survive. Well, that sounds good, but it's also misleading, and it indicates a lack of understanding of climate changes. Here are the facts not discussed by those who question climate science and who make such a claim. The planet is 4.5 billion years old, yet the creatures which mark our forerunners as humans have been around only 6 million of those 4.5 billion years. And what evolved to the point that we would truly recognize as these beings as being similar to current-day humans only really came on the scene about 300,000 years ago. That means humans have wandered Earth only 0.7% of our planet's existence. And what could be called human civilization, those are humans who began to communicate and record the world around them in an organized fashion, developed roughly 6,000 years ago. That's less than the time since the end of the last ice age. So we're truly, as humans, a flash of the geological pan. So when we hear false claims such as we've always had climate changes on Earth and we survived these changes just fine, that's at best misleading. Humans, since relatively recent beginning of human civilization 6,000 years ago, have missed out on the impacts of our climate's most devastating climate changes, including the most recent ice age. Yet smaller climate shifts, since these big climate shifts and ice ages, have actually been quite disastrous and had huge effects on humans. There have been 7 glacial periods in the past 650,000 years on Earth, the most recent having ended only 11,500 years ago. It's a fact that the human population on our planet today has exploded to its current level during what was surely among Earth's most stable overall climate regimes. It's during this stable climate period that current human civilization has developed to the point that there are now 7.9 billion of us. But to say that climate change has occurred during that period of explosive human growth without consequence, and therefore attempt to diminish the impact of climate change, is simply not true. Ask the settlers who moved to the Great Plains in this country during a wet climate only to be wiped out by the Dust Bowl. That was a climate change. A climate change to colder weather wiped out the Vikings on Greenland in the 14th century. The Mayan Empire down in Mexico fell in the midst of horrendous drought, which dropped rainfall over 200 years by 70% on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Millions died in the climate-induced Great Famine of 1317 to 1319, when winters were harsh, summers were cold, and springs featured flooding rains. Only the wealthy could afford bread in that period. It's likely the infamous Salem witch trials, in which 200 women were put to death because of the erroneous belief that cold weather and resulting crop failures, most notably during the Little Ice Age from 1680 to 1730, were a result of witches and their beliefs. That wasn't true. These were just a few examples of climate change impacts. Sure. We've actually missed out on the biggest impact brought on by past ice ages. It's likely those who dismiss the threat posed by climate change aren't aware that we as a species have, in the broadest sense of the term, not really experienced a really major climate change, which threatens our population. Our mammoth and growing global population means 7.9 billion souls require reliable supplies of food and water, all of which are threatened over time by shifting rains and more extensive weather swings in temperature. Climate change, which amounts to greater extremes of temperature and precipitation on all sides of the spectrum, in other words, wetter wets and drier dries, and more frequent and more intense heat waves when and where they occur, is significant. Now, we're already seeing ominous indicators as a result of climate shifts. The drought in progress across the West is, it appears, the first or second worst drought there of the past 1,200 years. Huge population centers like Las Vegas and Phoenix have exploded and onto the scene in the southwestern desert. They depend on water behind a series of dams on the Colorado River, among them Lake Mead behind Hoover Dam, which was built back in the 1930s. Water levels in Lake Mead, the key source of water for Las Vegas and Phoenix, are at their lowest levels since the dam was completed in the 1930s, at just 35% capacity. Not only are water supplies threatened there, but hydroelectric power generation in an area that swelters in the summer and requires air conditioning is at risk too. Water levels are dropping to levels that threaten the turbines in Hoover Dam, which produce electricity. And you know, many of us have heard the meteorological and climatological profession criticized with comments like, you guys can't even tell us what tomorrow's weather is going to be like, let alone now you're claiming to tell us what will happen in decades and centuries ahead. Well, first, the premise is wrong. Weather forecasts aren't perfect, but the fact is meteorological science is producing the most accurate weather forecasts in human history. Weather forecasts a week out are as accurate as next-day forecasts were in the 1970s, and they continue to improve. Tornado and hurricane watches and warnings are more timely. So are forecasts of record heat and cold a week or more ahead. But the accuracy of forecasts of day-to-day weather conditions diminishes as you move forward in time. So how is it that climate models work at longer time ranges than day-to-day weather prediction accuracy, which wanes the further you move ahead in time? Well, the answer is that predicting and modeling short-term day-to-day weather system evolution and making and modeling long-term climate trends is a very different proposition. The missions between short and long-term models are very different. We can't tell you, for instance, that there'll be a snowstorm impacting Champaign or Chicago this coming Christmas.
or even Christmas week, but we can tell you with confidence the temperatures over the coming 20 years will warm overall, and that precipitation will increase overall in these areas. Small-scale details are far harder to forecast than larger-scale climate trends, which involve more general forecasts of trends. Climate modelers prove that their long-term climate models work by taking weather data 50 years old, plugging it into the models and running it up to the current time and seeing if it accurately predicts what we're seeing right now. And the fact is, these verifications show these models work. Climate modeling back when I started my career more than a half century ago in the 60s and 70s, which were much simpler models that we're running today, showed that rapid warming of the Arctic was likely in our planet's future. Loss of sea ice was predicted to surge. I questioned both forecasts at that time, but I do no longer. The models have proved my doubts ill-founded. Both forecasts of rapid Arctic warming and melting ice in the Arctic have turned out to be on the money. 95% of the oldest, thickest ice is gone in just the past 30 years in northern Arctic regions. And the loss of ice there has risen nearly 13% per year, and it's accelerating. Contrary to the notion that modeling of climate change has been off the mark, the fact is modeling has been incredibly accurate. If models of climate have one deficiency, it's that they've underestimated the speed of climate change. Now that's concerning, because it means even as alarming as some forecasts are, what really transpires may be more disruptive if we don't do something about it. We exist in a very thin envelope of air that surrounds our planet. This belies the notion put forth in some quarters that our atmosphere is so large, who are we as mere humans to think we can impact it? You hear that at times. Also heard is volcanoes produce more carbon dioxide than humans. Both are false. Humans produce 60 times the carbon dioxide produced by volcanoes in a typical year. Our burning of fossil fuels dwarfs natural carbon dioxide production. The actual fact is that we live in a thin, life-sustaining envelope of air, which sets Earth aside from any other planet in our solar system. So thin is our atmosphere that half of its mass exists in the lower 18,000 feet of the atmosphere. That's approximately the lowest 3 miles. Our atmosphere, compared to Earth as a whole, is comparable to the thickness of the skin of a peach, to the peach as a whole. We humans are completely capable of impacting our atmosphere through our use of fossil fuels. Columbia University astrobiologist Dr. Caleb Scharf calculates it would take burning 10 billion acres of forest, an area 1.4 times the size of the entire African continent, to produce the amount of CO2 that we generate through the use of fossil fuels in a year's time. That quantity, by the way, comes to 40 billion tons annually. Put differently, we put millions of years of carbon stored by plants back into the atmosphere in under 300 years' time. Carbon dioxide is a heat-retaining and re-radiating gas which warms the planet, as do other gases like methane and oxides of nitrogen, most produced by burning fossil fuels, and each warming the air. 1/3 of the CO2 we produce by fossil fuels dissolves in our oceans, and this has turned the oceans 30% more acidic since the start of the Industrial Revolution. This is affecting marine life and ultimately the supply of food from our oceans. Scientists, by looking at the form CO2 takes in the air, can tell whether it's human-produced or whether it's produced by natural processes, and the evidence is completely compelling. The vast majority of the CO2 increase has been the product of human use of fossil fuels. Other myths. We have only 150 years or so of instrument weather data, so how do we know what's happened over the instrument record is truly out of the ordinary? Well, the fact is the instrument observational record may only go back 150 years. It goes back more in some places. But the actual climate record developed by the science of paleoclimatology goes back millions of years. The science of paleoclimatology has established a record of past climate going back millennia and beyond, using what are known as proxy records, including tree rings, ocean and lake bottom cores, ice cores, carbon dating, and it's established temperature and precipitation trends back billions of years. We all use proxy indicators There's nothing mysterious about them. We get up in the morning and we look out and see the pavement is wet. We may not have seen the rain falling overnight, but the pavement serves as a proxy indicator that it actually rained overnight. Al Gore said the Arctic would be ice-free by 2012. We love Al Gore and the attention he's brought to the climate change issue, but that was not the prediction at the time by a vast majority of climate scientists. The view of an ice-free Arctic was envisioned at that time as likely to occur in the mid-21st century. The current thinking continues to be that summers as early as the 1930s may see an ice-free environment in the north. Antarctica is a different story because it's the tallest, has the highest elevation of any continent on the planet. The elevation, mean elevation of Antarctica is 5,000, more than 5,000 feet above sea level. So that's like the front range of the Rocky Mountains to begin with, and then you put mountains on top of that. And that's why the coldest temperatures on Earth have occurred down there. We don't have the comparable situation around the North Pole. Well, there continues to be a misunderstanding about many aspects of the climate change. So when you hear climate change discussed, does the discussion turn to what's happening to the climate in the Arctic? Arctic regions, after all, are a long way from here, thousands of miles. The reason is that we talk about that. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. Climate changes in the Arctic are canaries in the coal mine. The melting ice there profoundly affects sea levels. The climate there, though far away, also acts as a thermostat for the remainder of the planet. The latest studies show the Arctic has been warming in recent decades 3 times the normal rate. Temperatures hit 100 degrees north of the Arctic Circle in Siberia in the last few years, a first. Lightning, once a rarity in the Arctic, now occurs with regularity. Talk to native folks there, and most will relate seeing a single lightning storm or having a relative see one, maybe back in the 1930s. Television stations in Anchorage, Alaska interrupted regular programming several years ago to cover particularly vigorous evening thunderstorms there where they normally didn't occur. With Arctic lightning, and lightning in many regions, including the American West, goes fire. The notion that Western fires, or those severe fires back in Australia several years ago, were predominantly the result of arson is overblown. And Arctic latitude forests have burned in recent years at record levels, including forests in Alaska, vast expanses of Siberia, and of Scandinavia. They burned at levels never before seen. The fires aren't new there, but the acreage burned is beyond what's been observed in the past. So here's the thing about climate change. We'll not stop it completely. Carbon dioxide, once produced, lingers in the atmosphere for centuries and millennia. What we can do with a global effort is we can try and slow the warming, allowing more time to adapt. But it's going to take a global effort. We can't do it alone, in this country alone. The nations of the world banded together and did it with chlorofluorocarbon propellants in aerosol cans, which were banned internationally by the Montreal Protocol in 1987. These propellants were damaging the stratospheric ozone layer, which protects us from deadly ultraviolet radiation. We slowed the growth of these propellants, and we banned them. And the stratospheric ozone level and seasonal hole in the ozone layer has been shrinking overall since. The last couple of years have been exceedingly cold in Antarctica, and the hole expanded some. There's a relationship between the coldness of a winter and how big the hole is. But overall, there's been repair underway in the ozone hole. So climate currently, China currently dominates our production of solar panels. And most of our wind turbines come from Spain and Norway. We should buy them, we should build them here and buy them from American workers and keep the new renewable energy jobs here. It's the fastest growing sector of the country. Now, be quiet. Thank you for listening. That was lengthy to have to look at this face and listen to that. But I'll tell you, it's something I'm passionate about. I hear such ridiculous, I've been putting things on social media, and the minute you put anything on, that smacks of climate science. You're told stop being political. This isn't political. This is at its core a scientific issue. Where it becomes political is what we do about it. And that seems to bother some people, the way wearing masks during this thing, this pandemic. I don't quite understand that, but that's just me. So at any rate, I did want to focus on some of the things that really burn me up when I hear them said, because they aren't true. And I don't think Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity or that ilk have no atmospheric science training, and yet pronounce the science as being a fraud and a hoax, have the wherewithal to be criticizing scientists like Don Wubbles and many other scientists who spent entire careers investigating this and have solid science to back the claims that and the conclusions that they've drawn. I'll just show you a couple of graphics real fast. There's a plot of global temperature. You've seen it right there. Let's go to the next one. This is a look at global ocean temperatures. By the way, note, that starts, I can't see the year there on the bottom axis, but you'll notice how rapidly the increase is occurring on the right side of the graph. That's the more recent warming that's gone on. Things are happening fast on the climate, on the planet. There are feedbacks that get involved that accelerate. Like when you melt permafrost, you put methane that's stored in it back in the air and carbon dioxide, and that only amplifies the warming effect. So there are feedbacks that keep it going. And the fear is that that might get out of control if we don't try and slow this down. Let's look at the next one. There is ocean ice, or Arctic ice, in the northern latitudes right there. And you can see the trend. That goes back to 1979. We picked that year because that's when satellites gave us a full view of the Arctic, and we could really measure what was going on. Next one. This is from our friend Dr. Brian Brettschneider, a climatologist. This is how much temperatures have changed in the last 100 years based on NASA calculations. The brighter reds are where the warming has occurred the fastest, and this confirms the trend that shows that the fastest warming is occurring in the Arctic regions. But no place is really escaping the warming, with the exception perhaps of small areas in the southeastern U.S. And what may be happening there is the warming leads to more moisture in the atmosphere and more cloud cover. We see that in our area. We have fewer 90 and 100 degree days here in Chicago, even though nighttime temperatures have increased and overall summer temperatures have increased. The reason we're not seeing as many hundreds at all is because we get more cloud cover and a moisture atmosphere. And I think that's limiting the warming that is going on and cutting down these extreme events. But that's not going on in other places. Witnessed 117 degrees in Portland last and 121 degrees in British Columbia. There were record highs in Argentina and South America. 123 degree high was a record high in Australia. It's occurring on every continent on the planet. There's a look at European temperature increases. Everywhere orange, dark orange is warmed dramatically in the last, this is just in the last couple of decades. There's Australia. Australia, that landmass is about as big as the lower 48 United States. On the left side, you've got Perth, the big city there. On the right side, you have Sydney. By the way, the rains that have occurred in eastern Australia in the last couple of weeks have been devastating. Here's an interesting thing. Remember the polar vortex we had several years ago in February? Bitterly cold. And at the time, you heard politicians say, boy, I wish I had some of that global warming right now. Well, the fact is, look at the blue areas. That was the polar vortex, misidentified, because that's not really what the polar vortex is, but we in the media decided to call it that. It sounded cool. The polar vortex is actually a high altitude circulation that surrounds the poles and has nothing to do with what's going on below, but that's a massive cold air. And you see the blue area that came down here, so we were freezing our tails off. And yet out on the west coast and up in Alaska it was warm, and look how much of the planet was warmer than normal, even as we in an area of Siberia were cold during that particular week. So it shows how selective these cold spells can be. It may seem bitterly cold outside, and yet when you look at the big picture, you realize it's not. Here's how much heavy downpours have increased since the 1950s. This is the work of Dr. Ken Kunkel, who's now in North Carolina State, but was head of our Midwest Regional Climate Center down in Champaign-Urbana. Again, we have drought going now. Doesn't mean every year is going to get wetter, but it means that's the trend since the 1950s. And you can see here is a decade-by-decade look at the trend in extreme rain events. And you can see the most recent decade has the highest increase because things are happening faster as we warm up. There are the fires. That was Siberia and northern Russia. Those are fires that occurred there. You know, we've had fires set by power lines out in the western U.S. That's been a major culprit. But you don't have power lines in Siberia. By the way, another myth is that because we're measuring temperatures in urban areas, that's why we're getting this skewed view of the planet warming up. Well, then I come back at anybody who says that and say, well, then why is, ice melts at 32 degrees? The Arctic is melting. If it's just where we're placing temperature thermometers, and it's the fact we have them in the cities, then why is the Arctic melting? If you're only measuring heat islands, and you're skewing the international and the global record, then we shouldn't be seeing effects like glaciers in retreat almost in every spot on Earth. That's not what it means. Here's what the fires look like out west. You realize people out west have year in and year out been breathing in these fumes. We don't know the health consequences of breathing all that smoke. Can you imagine these firefighters who have to go out there and breathe this in every day trying to fight these fires? I went out with Congressman Caston to a climate event across from the Capitol out in Washington, and different congressmen and senators brought experts in or constituents in from their various districts to explain the effects of climate change in their area. And I sat next to the fire chief from Reno, Nevada. We had an hour and a half before the session began. I said, wow, we're watching beautiful sunrises and sunsets in the Midwest from all that smoke that's blowing in on your fires. And he said, Tom, I've been a fire chief out here. He had left with a fire burning within 13 miles of his home to attend this conference. And he said, I've been fire chief out here for 30 or 40 years. I've not seen anything like this. He said, these fires spread faster, and it isn't all raking the forest. I mean, there is a forest control issue. But the fact is there was a bark beetle that was particularly devastating and devastated trees all up and down the west coast of North America, from Alaska down to the west. These dead trees are some of the fuel that's being burned in these fires that are burning. And the bark beetle was particularly voracious and deadly because of the warming climate. They're able to survive higher into the mountains and killing trees higher up and all the rest. But this fire chief said these fires are explosive. He said we don't have a prayer of a chance of containing these things. And we spent something like $9 billion last year on fire control out west. And yet, you see what happened. Look at the fires the last 2 months in eastern Colorado. Areas that were normally covered with snow, and had there been snow, they wouldn't have occurred. Whole neighborhoods were burned and wiped out. They lost 1,000 homes that belonged to people out there. This was an interesting 90-degree day in Anchorage, Alaska, something that had never happened before. And look at some of the other temperatures in south central Alaska. The next graph shows you how, see that little red line bar on the far right side? That's how frequently through weather history in Anchorage they've had a 90-degree temperature. That's how out of the ordinary this is. Let's look at the next one. Oh, erosion on the Great Lakes. We have watched lake levels change at a speed that dwarfs comprehension. We reached record highs in 1986. We went to record lows in 2013. We went back up to record highs in 2018 and 2020, and now it's going down again. If you plot Great Lakes water levels, there's a sine wave quality to the graphic. There are waves in it. The problem is they're not regularly spaced, so you can't use it to predict it. But we know there are ups and downs, and what's changed with climate change, and a lot, is the fact that it's precipitation driven and also evaporation driven. That's a pier. Oh yes, that's a pier off of Foster Avenue Beach underwater just a year and a half ago. But the speed with which these ups and downs are occurring is unlike anything we've seen up to this point. This is the aftermath of Hurricane Michael down in the Florida Panhandle, the worst hurricane ever to hit that coastline. We could go through these fairly, that's in the middle of the storm. This storm was one of these myriad hurricanes that are increasing incredibly fast, which complicates the evacuation. Hurricane Michael went from a Cat 2 hurricane to a Cat 5 top intensity in 24 hours. And that's because it's forming over warm ocean waters. There are the fires in Australia, which just boggle the mind. There are dead cattle due to drought. I was over in Australia. Oh, this is fire up in Sweden, above the Arctic Circle. And I was over in Australia a couple of years ago, and I went to the Bureau of Meteorology office in Perth, and I said to the director of the office, "What's your take on climate change?" He said, "Oh," he said, "our temperature is doing this, you know, a broad upward sweep," and he said, "the rainfall is doing this." He said, "The only one who doesn't believe climate change is occurring in our country is our Prime Minister, whose first act in office was to defund climate research at the government level." And this was before the most recent fires that took out millions of acres, killed over 1 million animals over there. I mean, you see these little koala bears coming out on fire and kangaroos. You couldn't escape it. If you've ever we held a koala bear, they're so gentle. They chomp on a vine, which is like a drug to them, and so they're content to sit there and chew on these leaves, but they're the sweetest things. And to think of them burning these fires, they burn forests that have never burned before in a billion years, it's pretty amazing. So, I'll tell you, and there was a picture of a Lake Michigan beach, which must have been 1,000 feet wide. That was back in the 1940s, right there. So I put that one in just to show how beaches have shrunk here with these types of high lake levels. There's been an estimate that almost $2 billion of lakeshore damage was done by high lake levels and the erosion that resulted from that. So anyway, that's it. I promise I'll be quiet now. Thank you for hearing all that.
Really wonderful. Thank you so much. So many amazing questions, and unfortunately we are running a little bit behind. So if it's okay, no, we're happy. No, we're good. It's all good. We're okay with it, right? It's okay.
Yes.
Cindy and I can chat with Tom, and we can get some answers, and we can put them on our website. If that's okay. I think that's a really, really good question. And we really appreciate y'all taking time to write those questions up for us. So thank you. We are going to move into our awards, which is the fun part of the evening. So if I could ask our presenters and our awardees to come on up, and we'll get that started. And I ask one more time, presenters and awardees. Come on up. Come on.
And bid for the 50-50 raffle.
Sue would like us to remind you to jump on and bid for that 50-50 raffle.
You all on Facebook can also do that. Sorry.
Little boys room.
Okay, we're going to, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Nancy Sheetzel to award the Young Defender of the Year.
It's my pleasure. Actually, it's been a pleasure for the past few years.
Yeah, what was that?
It's a green spot music bookstore on many holidays. Thank you for tapping on the glass. Can't hear back there? Can you if I hold it this close? How about this? Well, okay. So, as I was saying, it's been my pleasure to work with Matt Hansen during this past year at the Green Spot Youth Bookstore on many Mondays. In fact, we just, Cynthia and I just recently celebrated with Matt her 1-year anniversary of working in our Green Spot store. And she works there serving customers with friendliness, shelving books, vacuuming, and doing anything else that might be helpful in the store every Monday. Their work helped the defenders sell over 21,000 books last year in our 2 bookstores. Mac has actually adopted our children's section, so if you're in our store, you'll notice that it always looks well organized and attractive due to their work. I have especially enjoyed collaborating with Matt on decorating the store, as they are full of ideas, great ideas on how to make the store look nice. And they're always willing and able to make do everything that they can to make the store look welcoming. So today it is my honor to be able to present Matt with the Young Defenders Award, which says, Matt Hansen is receiving this award given to a Young Defenders member who has contributed most to environmental protection in the county for their volunteerism at the Green Spot Youth Bookstore and for their devotion to saving books from the landfill, creativity with decorating the store, and outstanding friendliness with customers, and for helping to keep the store open on Mondays, which helps to earn money for our environmental protection projects. So, thank you.
Okay, we're next. You guys come up, and I'm actually going to go ahead and give this award for this team to hold. So, okay, can you hear me now? So, I'm Cindy Scrugud, and I'm very pleased to present the McHenry County Division of Transportation with our Government Award. An award that's given to a McHenry County government group that has made a significant contribution to environmental health in the county for the past year. And McDOT is receiving this award for the numerous ways they are coupling environmental sustainability with a safe and efficient transportation system. And the McDOT staff that are here today with us, Ernest Varga, Kevin Kurchowski, and Scott Hennings, are working on a special project with the Defenders, funded by the Full Circle Foundation. Have you noticed the new signs at county roads, bridge crossings naming the stream and its watershed? Crafted and erected these signs on all their roads this past year, and then this coming year they will prepare signs for towns and townships to place on their roads. So thank you 3 for this great partnership and all of McDOT's other great initiatives. And the award reads, for partnering with us to install signage identifying names of streams and their watersheds at road crossings, for naturalizing the roadsides. You'll hear more about that in a special BMP talk later this year. For continuing to be a leader in the sensible salting movement, for installing environmentally friendly and fast reducing roundabouts, and for offering McRide and pursuing the complete streets concept to provide better, equitable options for people to bike, walk, and use transit to move around our county. So thank you all so much.
On behalf of the McHenry County Division of Transportation, I just wanted to say thank you very much to the Defenders for this award. Thank you to Cindy and her committee for all the work they did on the street sign project, as well as Scott Kuykendall, who was instrumental in the project as well. Thank you very much.
Ken Santowski.
Behave yourself, Ken.
How you doing? No. Okay. supposed to give out the word to me. Okay. Oh yeah. So Larry. Yeah, I'm saying. But I let him cross that out just right, Tom. Okay. Because you deserve it. But Larry took over the recycling department from Styrofoam. Oh, that's louder. Thank you. There you go. Okay. How's that? Okay.
Climate
Okay.
change
Larry took
locally.
over the recycling project.
There are not enough
Good
opportunities.
shoes
So
for
far
Dwight and
behind.
Gary.
I wish I could
who
put
are
it
worry.
on.
Don't worry.
I'm gonna put it on.
But he took on the project and came up with some
Discussion
great
coming on
initiatives.
our
So
website.
again,
I figured out how to do that. I'm not sure yet.
But the only thing is, we've got one chapter dedicated to climate change that focuses on local. So just, I could provide the website.
Okay.
That'd be great.
What the heck happened? Because let's be honest, guys. Behind every guy, there's a woman saying, do this or don't do that. So this award should really go to Thomasina over there. And told them, don't do this, but go ahead and
Just
do
give me a
this.
nod if there is an application.
Okay, thank
So
you.
we want to thank Larry for being a volunteer of the award on behalf of
Call
the
it a
beautiful
joke.
wife. People who told them what to do and what not to do. So the award reads, I'm going to read it off, blah, 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 blah. Larry, you're a great guy. That's pretty much it, okay? All right, everyone, better go.
You don't have to say anything. It's okay.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, environmental defenders of McHenry County, and to Dwight and Gary for introducing me. I appreciate it, fellas. That's great. Thank you, sweetheart. I know I tricked you into this. But you're a good sport.
And of course, we all know that we are not the defenders without all the volunteers, because our staff works so that the volunteers, we support the volunteers. That's who we work for, really, and that's all of you. So I applaud all of you. Yeah. And here, so, and this has a little surprise to it. So Zach is going to introduce our business award. Oh, you don't know about the surprise? We're getting frozen custard.
I'm Zach Dolezal. I own Duke's Alice Kitchen downtown Crystal Lake. I'm also I was really excited to be able to present this award. As most of you know, running a small business, hard work. Running a small business during these past few years has been really hard work. Running a food service business these past couple of years has been extremely hard work. With tight margins, it's not easy to make ends meet. So sometimes you find creative and strong small businesses able to overcome these obstacles. But even when they do, practicing environmentally conscious business efforts can hurt the bottom line and keep the most stream-minded of operators from implementing any sort of eco-conscious business model. Some businesses have learned that sustainability is marketable and have made small changes while others have done whatever they could to be environmentally responsible. Julianne's is one such business. I didn't even realize the extent of their green efforts until chatting with Pete at the McHenry County Sustainability Summit at the end of January this year. But the amount of effort that they put in, and they're kind of an unsung hero, to just kind of do business as usual, but just do it in a green way, which I thought was really cool. It's not necessarily celebrated, it's just the way they do it, and it's commendable. And I want to make sure that we're so happy to recognize them. So I'll go ahead and read the award for you guys. Julianne's Frozen Custard is the business award, and award given to the McHenry County business that has gone above and beyond to prioritize environmentally friendly practices within their business, for their passion for their community and the environment, for the use of compostable containers and packaging, for sourcing ingredients locally, and for offering vegan options for their guests. So, huge congratulations to you.
Linda, who's back here. I mean, it's really hard when you have to choose between
plastic tune that costs 2 cents than a compostable one that costs 35 cents or 26 cents. Yeah, so you need some support. And luckily I have family that's able. So thanks. Thanks everybody.
Thank you all so much, and thank you for the surprise frozen yogurt, and look forward to that. We also have a vegan cake, which is from a brand new business member as of Friday. It's a new place called Uprising Bakery and Cafe Hills. They donated a big portion of that cake, and they are business members now. They also have a silent auction item, so we look forward to digging in. I know you guys aren't doing anything else tonight, so just enjoy this. We're going to have cake, we're going to have frozen custard, and now to go on to our Theta Award. Here, come forward. I don't think there is really very many people in this room that have not been touched by Jack and Judy Spear. They are our Theta Award winners for 2021, our coveted award that we've been giving for decades. And Jack and Judy Spear are with Small Waters Education. They join the Conservation District, the Crystal Lake Food Pantry. They joined Bill Donato, the past director of McSeep, and so many others. We have a Theta wall in our office if you want to see. Come on by. But they are, I have to say, there was no other nomination because this organization is it. There just becomes a time when people and what they do are so deserving of this recognition. And that's not why they do it. They were very shocked when I called them, which is beautiful, as any of us in this room would be, because we're not out for awards. We're out to make a difference. And Jack and Judy Spear make a huge difference. They work with young people. They have the magic when it comes to working with young adults too. I want their magic. But luckily we have them. They have welcomed and opened their home to people to learn about permaculture. And they work with schools on pollinator gardens. They have a perihelion event every year and their own annual dinner and meeting. They do so much and have touched so many lives, and I know that a lot of you are aware of what they do, but did you know that they were the ones doing it? So Jack and Judy Spear, Small Waters Education, and they are Theta Awards for 2021, and I will read the award
22. It's all right, we're all stuck in time.
It's long. With the Theta Award, the highest honor we bestow upon an individual, I'll get it, or a group for outstanding environmental service for their work on advocating for, creating, and helping to maintain outdoor classrooms and native gardens, for pollinators at schools, for inspiring the youth in our county to help take care of the land and its critters, for serving the Latino community with Spanish pollinator garden brochures and through program participation with Conversación de Conservación, a partnering of community and conservation organizations, including the Defenders and the district, and Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge this year, for working on the county's first food forest with the Land Conservancy, and for all their work in educating our community on the importance of land and soil health, especially in the areas of permaculture and deep ecology, and for being a leading local resource for practical information and education about building a healthy ecosystem for all. While their organization is called Small Waters Education, they have huge hearts. Jack and Judy Spear, congratulations.
Get done. We are small in number, but we're mighty in reach and in desire to be part of this wonderful ecosystem. McHenry County has a wonderful ecosystem, and you're all part of it, and each of us does our part, and it's just really nice to be recognized and appreciated for it, and I think we should all appreciate each other for our parts of the ecosystem. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Is anybody getting too warm? Do we need to turn the air up a little bit?
It's just you.
No,
It's freezing.
no, back corner. Looking at the back corner because they were freezing. Lori McConville. Hi. It's time for the business portion of our meeting because this is an annual membership meeting as well. Lori.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. I just always feel privileged to be in your company, so thanks for being here, and thanks for all you're doing for our environment on behalf of the environmental defenders. So I am currently, I own Martin's Toy Store in downtown Columbia.
I just didn't have anything to write with them.
But my family is here today, so I'm very happy to have them with me, family and friends. But I was your president up until November because running a small business is very hard and time consuming. So I stepped down in November, and you are now in the very capable hands of Kim Jenkins. To let you know, there's a lot of work being done at the office and in the organization, and it has grown so much, it became too much for me to handle. So that's really a good thing where we are right now. Onward and upward. And so I have to do the business meeting, and I promise 45 minutes. No, 5, only 5 minutes. Okay. So you have, we are calling the business meeting to order, and you have on your table a purple sheet from the minutes. Before you see it, you've all read it. They are the minutes from last year's meeting. I need a motion to approve those minutes. So moved. Randy Sheetzel, our secretary, you have that. And a second, please.
Second.
Thank you. And your name, sir? Jim Keenan. Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes from the 2021 annual meeting, say aye. Aye. Very good. Thank you. Now we have election of officers, and I'm hoping I'm getting this right because I couldn't find them on my phone. So I'm looking here, and you will correct it. Board members, thank you. Oh, I do need to say thank you to Nancy. Nancy Sheetzel. She has been my mentor while I was a president. Yes, she taught me to lead, and I learned some very valuable lessons from her, so I'm ever appreciative of that. So, election of board members. We have coming up for 2-year terms.
Yep. 2-year terms.
Kim Jenkins, myself, Lori McConville, Claire Hodge, and Ken Santowski. Am I good? Okay. I have a motion to approve the election of these 4 officers for a term of 2 years. Pat Dekoff, and a second. Lisa McLaughlin is the second. All in favor of approving these 4 members for the next 2 years, say aye. Aye. And may I have a motion to adjourn the business meeting? Anyone? And a second. Thank you. We're good. Okay. And back to Kim. Oh wait, all in favor of approving the adjournment.